Are experimental procedures. 4.1 Materials and methods. 4.1. 1 Mice. Aged more than 24 months old, male C57BL/6 mice and young, 3-5 months old. Control mice were obtained from the National Institute of Aging Mouse Colony or Japan SLC Incorporated, Shizuoka, Japan. LGR5 Eggpires Crayer 2 mice were purchased from Jackson Laboratories. All mice were maintained in the C57BL/6 background and were housed on a 12 hours light, dark cycle at controlled temperature, 25 plus or minus 1 degrees Celsius. All animal procedures were in accordance with the Animal Care Committee of MIT and the University of Tokyo. 4.1. 2 Nicotinamide riboside treatment. Mice were administered with NR, chromadex, at a concentration of 500 mg kg one day one in drinking water for 6 weeks. Water bottles were exchanged every day. 4.1. 3 Dextran sodium sulfate treatment. Nicotinamide riboside, 500 mg kg one day one for 6 weeks, or vehicle-treated mice were subjected to 1.5% DSS with or without NR, 500 mg kg one day one, dissolved in drinking water for 5 days. Additional intraperitoneal injection of NR, 1000 mg kg one day one, or vehicle was employed during 5-day DSS treatment. At day 8 after the start of DSS treatment, the distal colon, 10 mm from middle, was isolated and used for histaining. 4.1. For immunohistochemistry. Pieces of the proximal jejunum, 1-4 cm from pylorus, were fixed overnight in 10% neutralbuffered formalin at room temperature, embedded in paraffin, and sectioned. Sections were deparaffinized and subjected to antigen retrieval with 10 mm sodium citrate, pH 6.0, in a 95 degrees Celsius water bath for 40 minutes. Slides were then incubated with the primary antibodies overnight at 4 degrees Celsius. The primary antibodies used were rat anti-BRD 1/200, Abcam 6326, rabbit antilysozyme 1/50, Thermoscientific B 516668, goat antichromogranin A 1/50, Santa Cruz SC 1488, and rabbit antiphosphus 60235/236, 1/400, cell signaling 4858. Further staining steps were carried out with a SA plus cyanin 3 system, Perkin-Elmer, according to the manufacturer's instructions. Finally, slides were mounted in VectaShield mounting medium with DAPI, vector. For the staining of BRD when phosphus 6, biotin conjugated secondary antibody was used, followed by the Vectistin Elite ABC immunoperoxidase detection kit, vector, and DACO liquid DAB plus substrate, DACO, for visualization. Microscopic images were obtained by a Zeiss axioimager M1 fluorescent microscope or Kiensalin 1 fluorescence microscope, BZX 710, and the fluorescent intensities were quantified by ImageEdge software. 4.1. 5 In situ hybridization. Digoxygenin, DIG, labeled ALPHM4 RNA probe was made using GNA, image mouse GNA clone 9055739, obtained from GE Healthcare as templates. To confirm the specificity of the probe, we generated both sense and anti-sense probe. Detailed methods are described previously. Gregory Van Clevers. 4.1. 6 Quantification. Crypt length and villus length were measured from the bottom of the crypt to the crypt-villus junction and from the crypt-villus junction to the tip of the villus, respectively, by ImageEdge software. Quantification in each mouse was performed from 50-150 crypt-villus units per mouse. BRD-positive CBC cells were counted as BRD-positive cells adjacent to Paneth cells visualized at the bottom of crypts. All ALPHM4 positive cells, which positions from 0 to +4 in crypt, were counted. Quantification of BRD or ALPHM4 positive cells in each mouse was performed from approximately 50 intact, well-orientated crypts per mouse under Zeiss axioimager M1 microscope. The number of mice analyzed is indicated in figure legends. The diameter of formed organoid colonies was measured by ImageEdge software. 4.1. 7 Crypt isolation and culture. Crypts were isolated from small intestine described previously. Sato and Clevers, Sato et al. Briefly, the proximal half, duodenum and upper half of jejunum, of mouse small intestine was isolated, opened longitudinally, and washed with cold PBS. We then scraped the intestine using a cover slip and removed the villi. After washing the intestine with cold PBS, we cut the intestine into small, 2-4 mm, pieces with scissors and washed them in cold PBS, pipetting up and down 5-10 times with a pipette. Washed pieces of the intestine were gently rocked in PBS containing 2 mm EDTA for 30 minutes at 4 degrees Celsius. Next, we pipetted pieces of the intestine up and down in cold PBS with a pipette until most of crypts are released. We got the crypt fraction by passing the suspension through a 70 micron cell strainer, corning, and centrifuging at 250 grams for 5 minutes. Isolated crypts were collected in crypt culture medium, counted, and embedded in matrigel, corning, at 10 crypts. A total of 300 isolated crypts were plated per well of a 48 well plate and cultured in a crypt culture medium, DMEMF12, thermoscientific, supplemented by 1xN2, thermoscientific, 1xB27, thermoscientific, 1 mm N-acetylcysteine, sigma, 50 ml EGF, thermoscientific, 100 ml noggin, pepridich, and 500 ml respondin, R&D or acrobiosystems. The medium was changed every other day. When indicated, NR, chromadex, rapamycin, Santa Cruz, or X527, Santa Cruz, was added to crypt culture medium. The number of organoids and the number per organoid of differentiated buds were counted 5 days after plating. In Figure 2, the absolute value of organoids is shown in y-axis. In the other figures, the ratio to control is shown in y-axis. 4.1. 8 colonic crypt isolation and culture. Colonic crypts were isolated from large intestine described previously. O'Rourke et al. Briefly, 5-7 cm or the proximal large intestine was isolated, opened longitudinally, and washed with cold PBS. Using a glass slide, the lumen of the intestine was scraped to remove fecal matter and mucosa. After washing the intestine with cold PBS, we cut the intestine into small, 5 mm, pieces with scissors and placed into cold 5 mm ED taps. Pieces of the intestine were gently rocked for 15 minutes at 4 degrees Celsius after removal of ED taps. Pieces of the intestine were incubated in the medium containing 500 UML collagenase type IV for 30 minutes at 37 degrees Celsius water bath. Next, we pipetted pieces of the intestine up and down in cold PBS with a pipette until most of crypts are released. We got the crypt fraction by passing the suspension through a 70 micron cell strainer and centrifuging at 250 grams for 5 minutes. Isolated crypts were collected in crypt culture medium, counted, and embedded in matrigel. A total of 1,000 isolated crypts were plated per well of a 48 well plate and cultured in a colonic crypt culture medium, DMEMF12 supplemented by 1xN2, 1xB27, 1 mm N-acetylcysteine, 50 ml EGF, 100 ml noggin, 500 ml respondin, 2 mm valproic acid, Waco, and 10 micron Cheer 99021, Stemgent. The medium was changed every other day. When indicated, NR was added to crypt culture medium. The diameter of formed sphere organoids was measured 5 days after plating. For secondary organoid assays, primary organoids were passaged as described previously, O'Rourke et al., on the 6th day after initial plating. The percentages of formed organoid were calculated based on the number of enterospheres observed on day 1 after passaging. 4.1. 9 flow cytometry. Intestinal stem cells and Paneth cell isolation was performed as described previously, Igarashi and Guerrant, Roth et al., Yilmaz et al. Briefly, the crypt suspensions were centrifuged for 5 minutes at 250 grams at 4 degrees Celsius. The pellets were gently resuspended in 1.0 milliliters of undiluted Triply Express, Life Technologies, plus 120 Liv D. Nasi, 10 Yule, Roche. The suspended crypts were incubated in a 32 degrees Celsius water bath for 1.5 minutes, were then placed on ice. 12 milliliters of cold mem was added, and crypts were gently triturated twice. After centrifugation, the pellets were resuspended and incubated for 15 minutes on ice in 1 milliliter mem containing CD45 Pe 1/500 ebiocients, CD31 Pe 1/500 biolegend, Ter 119 Pe 1/500 biolegend, and CD24 Pacific Blue 1/500 biolegend. After centrifugation, the pellets were resuspended with mem containing 1.5 propydium iodide, Pi, thermoscientific. The samples were filtered through a 4D mesh, Corning, and immediately sorted on a Faxaria, Becton Dickinson. Intestinal stem cells were isolated as LGR5 EGF5 CD24 low CD31 Ter 119 CD45 Pi, and peneth cells were isolated as CD24 high sides Caterhi LGR5 EGFP, CD31 Ter 119 CD45 Pi, Igarashi and Guerrant. April 1, 2010 culture of isolated ISCs and peneth cells. Isolated ISCs or peneth cells were suspended in the medium containing 1xN2, 1xB27, and 10 micron Y27632, sigma. ISCs 2000 cells with or without peneth cells 2000 cells were then seeded into 30 micron matrigel containing 1 micron JAG1, on a spec, and 10 micron Y27632. The matrigel drops with ISCs with or without peneth cells were allowed to solidify on a 48 well plate for 15 minutes in a 37 degrees Celsius incubator. The culture medium containing 1xN2, 1xB27, 1 mm N-acetylcysteine, 50 ml EGF, 100 ml noggin, 1 microgml R-spondin, Acrobiosystems, 0.5 microgml R-spondin, R&D, with 10 micron Cheer 99021, was then overlaid onto the drops of matrigel and maintained at 37 degrees Celsius incubator. When indicated, NR, Chromadex, rapamycin, Santa Cruz, or X527, Santa Cruz, was added to the culture medium. The medium was changed every 2 days. The number of colonies with lumen and the diameter of colonies were quantitated up day 5 of culture. In supporting information figure S5C, ISCs were cultured without Cheer 99021 after day 4 and formed organoids, not spheres, were assessed at day 9 of culture. In figure 2, the absolute value of organoids is shown in y-axis. In the other figures, the ratio to control is shown in y-axis. April 1, 2011 immunoblotting. Antibodies for immunoblotting were obtained from the following sources: Rabbit anti-GAPDH, cell signaling 5174, Rabbit anti-SIRT1, cell signaling 2028, Rabbit antiphosphorus 60235/236, cell signaling 4858, and Rabbit anti-6, cell signaling 2217. Isolated intestine, crypts, or ISCs were lysed in buffer supplemented with protease inhibitor and phosphatase inhibitor, Santa Cruz. Proteins extracts were denatured by the addition of SDS loading buffer, boiled and resolved by STSPIGE, and analyzed by immunoblotting with primary antibodies listed above. The band density of all blots was quantified by ImageEdge software. Acknowledgements. MI was supported by JSPS Kakenhi Grant Number JP17H06631, Takeda Science Foundation, Yakult Bioscience Foundation, Ubed Industries Foundation, and Mampi Suzuki Diabetes Foundation. LG was supported by grants from NIT and the Glenn Foundation for Medical Research. Conflict of interest. LG is a founder of Elysium Health and Gale Biosciences and consults for Sababalius and Sigtera. References